I am Wendy Blum Weiss, and this is our new podcast series, Redefine Yourself During Uncertainty. And I do sometimes get questions about relationships. I am in a relationship now 6 years and married for a year and a half, happily to say. But what I know to be true is that growing up, I didn't have a lot of positive reinforcement. There was a lot of divorce in our family. So I know I have been on a lifelong journey seeking tools and resources for growing relationships for the long haul, which brings me to the introduction of our great guest today, who I've known now for 11 years. His name is Jamie Greene. Hey, Jamie. Welcome, Jamie. Nice to have you here.
It's great to be here.
Jamie is joining us from LA, and I want to read a little bit about, I'm going to put my glasses on for this, about Jamie's background. So Jamie, born in England, is a therapist and has a master's in marriage and family and childhood development. And he is a leadership trainer and mentor for so many people. He was the coach on, for The Bachelor, I believe, like way back when. Yeah. And it's his Zen-like approach. I always really like this, the Zen-like approach with British sense of humor, straight talk that have helped people from around the world to enrich their lives. So welcome, Jamie. So happy to have you here.
It's great to be here. It has been 11 years. It's shocking. Exactly 11 years, actually. April was 11 years.
Wow. Well, this month.
Yeah.
This month. And we actually met here in Florida, and now you're back in California where your roots are.
Yep. Yeah, I've lived in LA twice as long as I lived in England, because I moved to LA when I was 18. I went to college out here, and I've been here 36 years. So go figure.
Wow. So do you go back to visit?
I haven't been back. I've lost count. I think it's 12 going on 13 years. I literally haven't been back because my whole family's here now. I have a 5-year-old kid who's here, and I was always waiting for him to be old enough to actually take it in and remember. So probably the next couple of years. But I have a few, and ironically, I've been Zooming some friends I haven't seen in years, because we barely talk or we email. So now everyone's got Zoom pretty much. So I've been actually Zooming with friends I literally haven't seen their face in a decade. Cool.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I think we're all doing that. And relationships are being redefined right now. There's like a whole new normal that's happening in every area of our lives, and in particular relationships. So that's interesting that you bring that up and reconnecting with people from your past. And now that we are spending so much more time with whoever is in our household while we are home, that's bringing up a lot of, let's just say, interesting ways of navigating into this new normal, bringing in different personalities. Sometimes the kids are home. And so how would you say, I just want to ask you this right out of the gate, like how do you recommend people handle if there's someone that is negative or complaining in the household?
I mean, that's a great question. It was a very existential thing you said, actually. I know you weren't trying to be, but a lot of people, the biggest challenge that I'm seeing, because I'm doing a ton of my coaching calls are on Zoom and FaceTime and all that. And what I'm actually seeing is people are having a much harder time who are alone. So on the one hand, yes, it's annoying. There's lots of cabin fever. There's lots of aggravation and walking on minefields and getting triggered and feeling pressured by having a partner, a family, kids, parents, whomever. We can talk about that. But actually, there's a whole other set of very deep existential loneliness that's happening with people who are alone, which is a ton. There's a lot of people who are really alone. That brings a whole different set of reference that people who are not alone have no idea. So there's different realms of experience that's happening right now. So I would answer the question differently depending on if the person they're having the hardest time with is themselves, because that's really coming up. Now that we're 5 weeks in, coming on 6 weeks in, even longer for some people, there's a very deep existential part of this process that's going on, where people who've been trying to avoid and deflect and stay busy are running out of things to do to avoid themselves. So now they're actually, or in the attempt to avoid themselves. So now what's actually happening is people are having to deal with some of this, lack of self relationship with themselves, whether it be low self-esteem or low self-worth, or just very tough on themselves, or just don't know how to be. It requires generally it requires a lot of patience and compassion and understanding to manage the anxiety of all of this unknown and the financial pressures everyone's under, and the unemployment and what's coming next. And a lot of people, some people are either really afraid of getting sick, other people could care less about the virus. It's more about the economy. It just depends, right? So, in terms of the people who are alone, that's one conversation. It's really learning how to finally take a few breaths and just learn to be with oneself and not run away from it. That's a whole podcast, right? That's something I really focus on a lot. Then in terms of what you're talking about, which is how do you deal with the negativity of someone who, for whatever reason, is not, looking at this as glass as half full, especially as we approach close to getting out of this mess, let alone the unknown of what that will look like. I really think that there has to be a lot of honest and direct, authentic communication, rather than let the stuff build up and get very passive aggressive and just complain and moan and get victim-y. I'm always about, not that everyone is comfortable with this, but I'm always about, this is the straight talk part, I'm about, let's just get real, but not fighting, not about getting drawn into the tension and the hostility, but finding a way to just really come from the heart, which requires awareness. First of all, you have to have an awareness of where you're coming from, or even that you're being negative, because oftentimes people are busy, just their worldview is coming out. You're seeing it a lot, and that look, people are who they are, and they see the world, they see the way they see the world, and it may well rub you the wrong way. Chances are it's not new that you're discovering that about the person you're living with, because you're living with them. Unless it's a roommate you just moved in with who you barely know, but we're talking about spouses and kids and cousins and all sorts of, and roommates. So chances are what's happened is we're being confronted with the fact that there's really nowhere to hide, nowhere to deflect. Now, if we had this conversation a month ago, it would be a different conversation. But now people have pretty much worn out everything they can do to try to just get through it. It's really hit its apex, and I've seen a lot of, in the last week or two, I've seen a lot of things boiling over now. A lot of dysfunction and toxic stuff's coming up. I don't know that this is true. I'm hearing from a lot of people, colleagues I work with, that the divorce rate is really skyrocketing, because I was saying to Wendy before we had this call, that the court system is shut down in terms of trials, but lawyers are at home working and filing, and electronically and digitally, everything's still happening. So there's all sorts of filing and mediations and Zoom mediations and divorces and courts. I know someone has a restraining order. They had to have an appearance on the phone, so it's happening. But it's really coming to a head for sure.
Yeah, it brings up an awful lot, and you're right. I know here personally. So we, for the first 3 weeks, we were like, this is so great, spending all this time together. And then week 4, it started to slide down, like, you're here, you're still here. And no, I don't want to watch that show, or, I want something else to eat. It's just like so many little things that come up. I remember locking myself up in the bedroom, really literally, like for a full day, and said, I'm just going to stay here. And you're right. A lot of people are alone, or they're really craving seeing the rest of their family or their parents, and just all the activities that would have been, that are not right now. I know that there are a lot of resources out there, though. There are a lot of calls, and you have groups that meet. So anybody that is isolated, or anybody that is alone, or podcasts that they can listen to so that they can feel connected. And that's whether you're alone or in a relationship, so that you can fill yourself up, so you come back full. Like, I went to the bedroom for a day, and then I came out enriched, like ready.
Yeah.
So I guess there's part of it of getting to know yourself enough that if you start to find yourself at a boiling point, let's say, where you might say something that you would regret later. So do you have any tips for that? Like, if it's on the tip of your tongue, like how you can call it back in, or what
it comes back to the whole concept of reactivity, right? And awareness, and how much of the unconscious is getting triggered. and is building. A lot of, look, there's not a lot of people who are very skilled at effective conflict. There are people who are bullies and mouth off, and that's their version of confrontation, which is get in your face, which is not effective in terms of being heard and respected, okay? And then there are people that avoid confrontation completely and don't say anything and just let things fester inside. Those are the two extremes of the most dysfunction. Then you've got in between, which is there's something I need to share with you. I need to clear it with you. I need to be able to bring it to you. And that has to do with, I would almost call it a level of mastery of self-control, so that we can check how we're bringing it. It's not the words we use, it's how we relay the message. That's what will determine, I call it effective communication. That's what I'm all about. When I teach leadership, which is one of my favorite things to teach, I talk about, a great leader is an effective communicator. There's no right or wrong way. There's ways that whatever the message is, it lands. I mean, just look at what's going on politically right now. It's there are people that you want to listen to, who they're compelling because they're honest and they're personal and they're transparent and they are accountable. And then there's the sociopaths, who should remain nameless, who you don't believe a word that comes out of their mouth. There's no accountability. Nothing's honest. It's kind of laughable. But you're seeing that because people are really people are wanting to be led. And there's very, very, well, you're seeing it. Some governors are amazing leaders. Some governors are really have no idea what they're doing. It's just interesting because we never really all sat at the same time and watched it. I'm so not political, but all of a sudden I'm watching all this political stuff go on, and I'm just seeing it from a place of pathology. So to me, what it comes down to is you got to be able to make sure that sometimes you have to schedule it. Sometimes you need to say, hey, because you want to make sure that the person that you have to share this with, a spouse, a kid, a teenager, that they're in the most likely receptive place to hear it. That's important. Okay, you got to make sure that there's the opening for the person to hear it. So oftentimes, rather than, I do this all the time. If I'm calling a client to have to deal with something, the first thing I'm going to say is, hey, is this a good time? Because if it isn't, I don't want to feel like I'm banging my head against the wall. About anyone I call, by the way, it doesn't matter who I'm calling. It could be my accountant, it could be a dentist, whatever it is. I believe that's a good technique. If someone calls me, I'd always say, you know what? Either I won't pick up if I can't say, or I say, hey, we've got 5 minutes. If it's really critical, let's talk. Otherwise, I can go back in a couple of hours when I have more time. That's important. You got to create the opening and the environment where someone is willing to hear. Because if you feel someone just can't wait to get off the phone, they're not going to hear you. They're just not. Number one. So create the opening. And sometimes that's like, hey, when can we talk this week or tonight? And we have to go over budget, and it brings up anxiety and it's stressful, but can we please schedule a time? And you schedule it. You just got to, it's tasky. It's not fun. It's particularly evocative right now, given the money situation, but you do it, right? So you have a conversation. And then most importantly is how am I coming at you? So one of the terminology I use in leadership training is called context. And you remember me talking about this years ago, but context is a term we use in leadership that has to do with the place I'm coming from as I talk to you. So my body language, my attitude, my energy level. And if I can come from a place of not being intimidating and negative and grouchy, I'm more likely to be received. It's a very practical thing. I'm more likely to be heard if the place I'm coming from is not threatening and accusatory. It's simply, hey, I really need to let you know there's something on my chest. I need to clear with you. It's been upsetting me. Who wouldn't hear that? That's the effective version. I'm not saying everyone is able to do that. And we're not able, if we're triggered, it is not worth having a conversation in the moment of your most reactive triggering. Because there's no way that anything you say and how you're going to do it is going to be effective. Does that make sense?
Once all those like cortisol runs through and you start to bubble up in that emotion, then you can't actually really hear. So you bring up the first step is actually the awareness, so that you can be receptive to actually
timing and what I call context, which is the place I'm coming from. So at least I can control that. Like I can't control whether you're ready to hear it or not. I can't control anything about you, but I can at least take charge of being the leader. By the way, the golden rule of communication, if you haven't taught your beeps this, is whoever is doing the communicator is the one to be responsible for the communication landing, not the receiver. So when someone's frustrated saying you just don't get it, that's because I'm not delivering it cleanly. So always, if you're doing the one doing the communicating, it's our job to make sure the way I'm expressing it is able to be received. once you have the opening. That makes
Yeah.
sense?
So true. And what's interesting is one word can make a difference. So right now I have a fractured foot, and which means I have to ask and depend on, right, my husband to do more for me. So I was asking him, could you, honey, could you get me a cup of coffee?
Mhm.
And because we've been like working on communication and really connection, he actually then said back to me, could you use another word? When you ask me, could I do that? Can you rephrase that, reframe that? And I said, okay. So I gave him like, how does this, like if I asked you, please get me a cup of coffee,
Sure.
like, is that better for you?
Yeah.
And he said, that is better. So the difference between could you get me a cup of coffee and please get me a cup of coffee? Because one, for me, I would interpret as being directive and not wanting to be directive, and wanting to ask, but he prefers it the other way. So now I know. And then when I was languaging, again, I was almost saying, and then I was able to change it to please and then just reframe that. And he's receiving that so well. And he actually has been so incredibly helpful, at a time where it's already stressful to begin with. And then, now there's the dependability piece on there. And that's happening, I know, in a lot of different ways in all sorts of households. There's like so many different layers of things going on, so many different needs going on.
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Just again, you can't do any of this if we're simply unconsciously just projecting and acting out, which is what a lot of people without understanding, one would hope, one would assume that if someone's tuning into your podcast and someone's talking to me, there's an inherent awareness and a desire to make things as, I don't know, as manageable and harmonious as possible, because that's the nature of the person who's curious to want to learn. That's why people are looking up, podcasts and getting on YouTube, because there's a curiosity. Those are the people who are pretty smart and aware and are probably more willing to take in the messages they're getting. Then there are the people who are just oblivious or very narcissistic, and they just care less. There's no awareness. And they're much harder to deal with. It's not easy to live with a narcissist right now, that's for sure.
Yeah, that is for sure.
Yeah.
I do see more people like out walking and couples, like, going for a bike ride. And then you see, like I saw my aunt and uncle like posted that they did a beautiful lunch and they used their special china. Like they actually pulled out their special china. So there are people that are being innovative in ways of managing, navigating, and even like taking their relationship to like another level. Do you have some suggestions for someone who is listening? They're like, okay, it's up and down in my household too. So what are a few ideas to kind of smooth out those rough patches?
And when people are having rough patches because they're living together?
If we're talking about living together in relationship with significant other, kids home or kids not home.
Yeah, well, I think that this is the part that the people living alone have too much of an abundance of, and that is personal space and autonomy. So when you're kind of living on top of each other, the importance of having your own alone time is really huge. So whether that looks, so there's obviously, yes, there's going on bike rides and doing stuff together, which is lovely. Those people are probably not fighting. Otherwise, they're going to want to ride off into the sunset without their partner. So I would say that making time for yourself, especially kind of maybe tag teaming if it's having to monitor the kids, so that someone's, obviously monitoring and babysitting or doing their homework or whatever it is, depending on how old the kids are. So the other person can really go off and spend some sacred time, an hour or two, and really get that time. Go for a walk, go do the meditation. I'm all about having people leave the house when possible, going into nature where possible, not beaches and hiking trails that are closed, but just walking around the neighborhood. For me personally, we live in Pasadena. I live kind of just below the foothills and mountains, and it's gorgeous. Neighborhood is stunning. There's peacocks, wild peacocks running around. For me, the time going out and spending an hour and just clearing my head and being quiet in the neighborhood. One of the things, certainly in this neighborhood, but one of the things that I've been aware of for the last 5 weeks is the world out there is untouched. It's uncorrupted. You would have no idea. The trees are not, wearing masks. the trees and it's spring and it's lush and it's beautiful everywhere right now. So to me, it's actually very grounding and calming, and it's kind of like the innocence is still there. Life before quarantine is the same when you go out and walk around the neighborhood. Yes, you see a few people walking around with masks because it looks bizarre, but beyond that, that's really grounding. So I would just say have a really good, mutually benefiting, reciprocal agreement that couples need space. It's okay. That doesn't mean there's a problem. We need space. We need to go clear our heads. We need to go miss each other a little bit. We need to go have an appreciation, have some gratitude. Look, we're having massive gratitude for life as it used to be right now, remember? And I know that it won't quite go immediately back, but we will slowly start to appreciate, even when I go to the store and deal with all of the protocols around the store, but I still appreciate being able to go do it. You guys don't have earthquakes. I know you have tornadoes, but in LA, having been around the really big one in '94, and my office was destroyed. I mean, it was, you're quarantined, but you also can't get to the store and there's no water and there's no heat. That's pretty scary because everything's cut off. And if you didn't happen to have an earthquake kit where you had supplies and extra water, extra food, you're kind of in trouble. So this is fortunate in that all they have to do is not go to work and not really be out and congregate. You can go to the store. Everything as they promised is everything is available. Even toilet paper you can get now and tissues. Pretty remarkable. But yeah, so I would say the importance of balancing time where you got to have some quiet time. And again, there was about 5 days in LA where it rained every day, and I had my 5-year-old with me, and we could not go out. It was freezing. It was rainy. It's unusual weather, but it is what it is. I couldn't get out, and it was difficult. It was more challenging. But there's plenty of opportunity to take quiet time, regardless of going into nature or going outside. I just think having an agreement that you tag team and you scratch each other's back and you make sure that whatever time you've taken, then your spouse or your partner or your roommate or your kid, depending on what situation, definitely take the time to do that, because it's not about trying to get away and not deal. That's the reactive version. It's actually going off and just getting some quiet time because there's too much in your face. It's just letting things settle. Let the dust settle.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also think that there's also some opportunities to do something that you wouldn't have been able to do before, like have some fun, like do a singing lesson or a dance class or listen to some comedy or something there too. So there are, some ways that you can get an outlet.
Yeah, and I'm just talking on the one side about having some space and letting the tension settle down. Then, of course, that's what we started talking about, which is opportunities to do something together, not just go on bike rides, but learn a course together, do yoga together, on all this online stuff, study together, listen to a book on tape together, watch documentaries you never have time to watch. There's also that, and I think people who live together, I think it's a blessing that you get to have time with your kids. I know there's a frustration of it, but I think also having the opportunity to be with the ones you love it's a blessing, because, people are going to miss this. I know we're going to be nostalgic about this time, a few months and years from now. We're going to look back and you can go, wow, you remember when we had all that time together, every meal together, every weekend together. It's unprecedented across the freaking globe. It's just unprecedented. We have no reference for this. And although we're busy bitching and complaining because we've had enough, there will be a time not too far from now where we're going to really think about this as one of the greatest times of our lives, actually.
I love that you said that, because that just really rings true. And we don't miss it until we don't have it. Like we didn't really miss being able to go for a walk or go to the store until we didn't have it. And you're exactly right. So that is a beautiful way to look at bringing it all home. So for our listeners and our viewers, how can they get more of you? How can they find you online?
I appreciate that. So I have a website, jamiegreen.com. It's JAMIEGREENE. And on my website, I have a way to get a hold of me if anyone wants to do any kind of one-on-one coaching. It's all Zoom connected right now. I also have a couple of programs on there that are available for download. I have a relationship course. It's a little 3-4 part audio program called Alchemy and Love, where I cover what I call the 4 pillars of a man and the 4 layers of a woman, which is really getting into really identifying the qualities that are really essential that we make sure we are building in ourselves so we can have good, healthy core relationships. And then I have a program. My coaching company is called Off the Couch Consulting, because, you know, I was a shrink for, I've been a shrink for 30 years, but 10, 11 years ago, when I came back to LA from Boca, I started my coaching practice. So Off the Couch Consulting is about getting off the therapy couch, because I was a very traditional psychoanalytic therapist. And so I have actually what I call my flagship Off the Couch program, which is a 10-part audio series, which really goes into very specific, like, tools for living authentically, I call it. And there's a lot of stuff in there, for example, around how to manage communication and confrontation, get the ego in check, and commitment. And there's some really good stuff in there. So you go to my website, click on programs, those will pop up. And then I just recently, just on Monday of this week, did a little webinar on the anxiety of isolation and dealing with 5 tools specifically, how to manage being overwhelmed, everything we're talking about. And so, but people can go and also purchase that too. It's up there. You'll see it'll say anxiety workshop.
I'll link all your links below in the description center. And I'd love to invite you back, Jamie, because I'd love to have a conversation around dating in the new normal. So I want to invite you back for that. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everyone, for watching.
Awesome. Thanks. Nice to see you.
You're awesome. Great to see you, Jamie. Thank you, everyone.